Welcome to Rappaport Connects, where we interview notable Rappaport alumni. Today, we are joined by 2024 Rappaport Institute Fellow Michael Whelan. Michael received his BA in Political Science from Georgetown University and his Master's in Urban Planning from Harvard's Graduate School of Design. He is currently pursuing his JD at the University of Michigan Law School. Michael, welcome to Rappaport Connects.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
Michael, tell me how you learned about the Rappaport Fellowship.
Sure. So my involvement with Rappaport actually goes back all the way to the start of my second year of my planning program. I got my Master of Urban Planning at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. And I was able to take in the fall of 2023 the Urban Politics Field Lab with Professor Justin de Benedictis Kestner. And in that role, my team and I worked for the town of Provincetown on Cape Cod, looking at how they could increase year-round rental housing. I enjoyed that field lab experience so much that I came back for a second field lab in the spring, again with Rappaport as a sponsor. And this time, I was working under Professor Linda Bilms in the Greater Boston Applied Field Lab on Management and Budgeting. And that was where me and my teammates, we first started working for Congressman Seth Moulton, looking at infrastructure improvements to the rail network in Massachusetts, particularly the North-South Rail Link and South Station expansion. So my experience with the fellowship in the summer was really kind of an outgrowth of that really excellent field lab in the spring during my final semester of planning school.
Do you mind sharing a little bit about what you learned for the town of Provincetown?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So Provincetown is in, and actually a lot of communities on Cape Cod and places like Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard are really in a bind in terms of these are seasonal resort communities. And as a result, their housing market is really set by people who are primarily buying second homes, who are there for the summer. But what that means is that the people who live there year round and might not have the kinds of incomes that allow someone to purchase, a second home in Provincetown, Massachusetts, or a similar seaside community, they need a place to live, but the housing market is being set by this second home market. So it becomes really, really difficult. And if someone bought a home, back in the 70s or 80s, they have a little bit of security. And so where you really see the acute need is in the year-round rental market. So that's kind of what our focus was for Provincetown. And what we ended up finding after a semester of work is that the town basically had to take sort of an all-of-the-above approach and tackle the problem through multiple ways. So as you might expect, I was the one urban planner on the team. And so as you can imagine, I really drilled down into the zoning regulations. Provincetown has this very classic New England seaside built environment with little cottages and duplex homes and closely spaced buildings along its main street. And the sort of ironic thing is this very beloved urban form in Provincetown is actually very much not in conformity with its zoning code, which dates to kind of the 60s, 70s, 80s, a period when generally there was an emphasis on downzoning, single-family zoning. And so I looked at how you could modify zoning regulations just to make even some of the existing building stock that people love in Provincetown, making it possible to build that kind of built environment again. And then other folks in my group looked at programs like there's a great program called Lease to Locals that encourages homeowners who might have an available extra unit to lease it out to folks who live and work in the community. So we found sort of a variety of approaches were needed to address the problem.
Thank you for sharing that. This is a problem that I know many communities are having, particularly, as you mentioned, coastal communities.
And I should add as well, COVID significantly accelerated the problem because more work from home flexibility as well just created a lot of pent-up demand.
It seemed like a lot of people bought down the Cape during the COVID pandemic. So I didn't realize you were part of the Applied Field Lab. That is wonderful. So you're sort of a double Rappaport fellow here. And then you had your fellowship at the Rappaport Institute, and you worked in the office of Congressman Seth Moulton. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I was very fortunate to work in the district office up in Salem. In the spring semester, my teammates and I, we were looking at essentially two projects that would enhance the capacity of particularly the MBTA commuter rail network in Greater Boston, and specifically focused on the transition from that network to sort of hourly service or even less frequent service that is primarily focused on bringing commuters into the city in the middle of the week and bringing them out, to sort of an all-day, all-trip kind of service that's much more frequent. And so the two projects we were looking at, one is called South Station Expansion, which involves adding extra tracks at South Station. Right now, there's a very large post office sorting facility right next to South Station. And so the project, which is sort of being led right now by MassDOT, would be to ideally relocate that USPS sorting facility somewhere else and use that space to expand South Station. And that would add some additional train slots to the southern side of the MBTA commuter rail network and some additional tracks for Amtrak. The project that the congressman also really wanted us to focus on, though, was the rail link. And this is a project that I think, if folks are aware of Massachusetts infrastructure, it's kind of been something that's been talked about for a very, very long time. Congressman Moulton is fond of saying that the original event that canceled the rail link's construction was World War I. So this is an old idea, but the reason it keeps coming up is because it has a lot of benefits. So what this would entail, I want to be clear, because sometimes there's like misconceptions. It's not like you're just building a subway tunnel that would shuttle back and forth between North Station and South Station, and then you'd get off and get on the train where you're going. The idea is that you would institute run-through service by digging a tunnel under actually the most likely alignment. There's a couple of alternative alignments that have been studied, but the most likely would be under the central artery, where a clear sort of space of dirt was actually left during the Big Dig construction. And you would dig this tunnel and link all of the lines on the northern side of the MBTA rail network to all of the lines on the southern side. And potentially there could be opportunity for Amtrak to use the tunnel as well for its service that goes up to Maine. So what you would do is you'd create a system where you could get on a train in Framingham and take it to Salem direct, like you would speed under downtown Boston in 5 minutes. Or maybe you could get on a train in Providence and take it straight the way through to Lawrence, right? You would essentially pair each line on the north side of the system with a line on the south side of the system, and it would really integrate and bring the region together. So we were in the spring looking at the costs and benefits of these two projects in tandem. And then in the summer, I was really focused on the railing specifically, as well as sort of ancillary projects that could help that. Like there's an effort underway to electrify the Fairmount line and institute much more frequent sort of all-day service there.
You know, I talk to people all the time who end up at South Station and then need to get to North Station. So can you share some of the pros and cons of why we should build this, and what are some of the arguments people are coming up with that why we shouldn't do it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that my teammates and I found, and this continued to come up even when I was working for the congressman this summer and we were talking to different stakeholders, is this is a very significant infrastructure investment. It is going through downtown Boston. I think in Boston, there's a bit of what we kind of sometimes will call the Big Dig hangover, right? The Big Dig was sort of open heart surgery on downtown Boston over so many years. And so there's this fear of sort of disruption from another construction project under downtown Boston. I will say, I think that particular argument is not as viable in light of improvements in tunneling technology, and specifically in some of the differences between the type of railway tunneling that would happen versus the sort of highway cut and cover construction that happened. So basically what you do now when you build one of these tunnels, and this is something that a lot of peer cities across the world have done, we're lagging on it a bit in the United States, but people might be a little bit familiar with London opened a new cross-city rail line called Crossrail a couple of years ago that got some coverage. And that's like doubled ridership in Greater London. It's really sped commutes across from east to west and west to east in the city. And the way that they built that is with a tunnel boring machine. And so the way a tunnel boring machine works is you dig a box, basically, and you put a machine underground, and it almost like one of those sandworms from Dune, but a lot slower. It only goes like a few inches per day. It'll gradually dig the tunnel underneath, and you might not even know that construction's happening. So I think one of the concerns that is immediately raised is disruption, but I also think it's manageable in the context of like modern technology. I will also say another big point that is raised is that it costs a lot of money, right? Our estimates, we updated a cost estimate as part of our study, and we found that it would be, $8 to $9 billion in the midpoint year of construction. So that is inflated a bit from our current dollar terms, but that's even then, it's a relatively large number. And so that is something that is raised. We also found that the benefits of the project would be more than $30 billion over sort of a 20-year time span of benefits. So it is something that is high cost, but also quite high reward.
Fascinating. You mentioned that it could take possibly somebody from Framingham to Salem. What does that person from Framingham have to do now? What's their current situation if they wanted to get to Salem on the commuter rail?
So right now, you're constrained on the MBTA commuter rail network by essentially two factors, right? So first, there's just the factor of speed. So if you get to the station and there's a train showing up in the next 5 minutes, right? You might not have to wait long, but if you're going from Framingham to Salem, you have to take the train to South Station. And then from South Station to North Station, you can either take two different subway lines. You can walk if the weather's nice. It's about a mile, a little bit less than a mile potentially. Or you could maybe, if you don't have a lot of bags with you, you could maybe take a blue bike, right? Or a taxi, of course, if it's raining. But these are all additional expenses. And also, one of the things that you find with public transit is that there's a very large, what's called a transfer penalty. And so riders will value a one-seat ride to a degree even greater than what it saves them in terms of speed because of the increased convenience of not having to get up, get off one vehicle, get on another vehicle. So there's that aspect of speed. The bigger thing that I really dove into, though, is frequency. So right now, because both North Station and South Station are terminating tracks, you have significant upper bounds on the level of frequency that can be run in and out of those stations. So a train runs in, it has to turn around. Even at their fastest, because of things like brake tests that the Federal Railroad Administration requires when a train terminates and then restarts its run, it can take anywhere from 15 minutes to even more than that, half an hour. A train might be sitting on a platform, not really doing anything, not being in service, before it gets back out going in the opposite direction. And so that really punishes the ability to run very frequent service on the rail lines. If you build a through-running tunnel where trains run right the way through, well, it becomes more like the rapid transit lines we're familiar with in Boston, like the Orange Line or the Red Line, where you can funnel a lot, like you can funnel a train through every couple of minutes on a track because it just keeps going right the way through, and you're not having to turn it around. You're not having to have crew walk all the way out to the other side of the train because they're, now operating into the opposite direction. So the through-running aspect allows for big increases in frequency. I did some frequency modeling, and we found that on the core section between like Back Bay and North Station, you could be talking about a train every 3.5 minutes.
Have there been any studies on how this would impact traffic if it were implemented?
That's actually a really good question. My teammates and I should say I had 4 other MPP students who worked on this with me. Shout out to Amanda, Jeb, Gloria, and Peter. But Amanda in particular looked at the benefits from mode shift, and she was primarily focused on the carbon cost of driving. So that was looking at quantifying the impact of specifically the drivers who, because of this increased accessibility, will switch from a current driving trip to a transit trip. And so we did calculate that, and over the 20-year period, we found it would be like more than $1 billion in carbon savings. But I should say that our study was not just based on sort of the time constraints we had and what we were working with. We didn't look at traffic modeling. And that is, I think, something that would be really valuable to look at as this moves towards what we're hoping for, what I think some of my colleagues at the Congressman's office. And I should say, in terms of, I haven't spoken directly about next steps and things with the Congressman since I left my fellowship in August. And as we know, in the world of politics, these things are always changing. So I don't know if this is the current sort of ask. But when I was there back in the summer, we were hoping that MassDOT could potentially look at another rigorous study of this, potentially by future rail operator or someone with experience in construction who could also look at those kinds of traffic benefits. Because it would, I think one of the best arguments you can make to folks is that, these are cars that will no longer be sitting on the Northern Expressway, right? Their folks will be instead taking the train in from Reading or Lawrence or wherever.
Exactly. Well, I mean, traffic is really, it seems like it's getting worse and worse within the city. So I think
Yeah.
that would be fantastic. Do you know why the congressman is so passionate about this project?
Yeah, so he is a huge advocate across the board for modernizing our transportation network, both in Massachusetts on the North Shore, where he represents, but also nationwide. So earlier in the summer, or it might have even been in the spring, he introduced a National High Speed Rail Act with the goal of finally building high speed rail in this country, which the vast majority of our peer nations have been able to accomplish. And this is sort of one more aspect of his advocacy. And I think for the congressman, it's really about modernizing our system to be truly like the world class modern rail systems that whisk people around cities like Paris and Munich. And I think there's a sense that sometimes exists where people think that transit advocates are nostalgic, or we're interested in, oh, people used to ride trains and streetcars places, and what that was quaint and nice, and we should have more of that again. And that couldn't be farther from the congressman's thinking on this. Like, he is 100% devoted to fast, efficient, and frequent modern transportation. And what convinces him are the facts. And the facts are that all the cities that have built these cross-city rail tunnels, I mean, Crossrail is a great example of this. It just opened, and it single-handedly has caused the UK's rail network to completely surpass their pre-COVID numbers, even though everywhere else in the UK, ridership is still well below pre-COVID levels. But it's because it's fast, it's frequent, it's efficient. And he's also experienced on this. He used to work in Texas back when the initial plan to build high-speed rail between Houston and Dallas was developed. He actually worked for that company early in his career. So this is an area where he has, I think, some expertise, and he's bringing that to bear on Capitol Hill, which was exciting for me, because I think, if you can't tell by now, that I sort of share this passion. So it was great to be working for the office.
Well, I share the same passion as you, and I hope that it does move ahead. And at this point, if people wanted to learn more about it, do you know where they would go to do that?
Yeah, so we published on the congressman's website. If you go to his issues page, he has one on modernizing our transportation that has sort of a slide deck that goes through some of the findings from our study, and a one-pager, actually I think it's more like a three-pager, that goes through kind of what some of the benefits of the rail link would be. And the podcast also interviewed him. So if you're interested in hearing more, I'd encourage you to sort of take a look at that. And then also, just more generally, I always think that it's a good idea to be abreast of developments with the MBTA. Things are changing a lot now. We've got slow zones being eliminated and that sort of thing. So I would just follow the transportation reporters at the Globe and other publications in the region.
Great resources. Thank you. So now you're attending the University of Michigan Law School.
Yes.
Michael, what are your career goals, and how do you plan to combine your background in urban planning with your legal education?
Exactly. So urban planning is great at knowing what kind of cities we need to build and how we need to adapt to, for example, climate change, how we need to adapt our transportation systems, how we need to solve the housing crisis, right? And urban planning has been fantastic in informing me with amazing resources to sort of know what the vision needs to be. But on some of the issues I'm most passionate about, transportation is one of them. I'm also very interested in the housing crisis. It is actually often through regulations, policies, zoning codes that these things are implemented. I took a fantastic class, Land Use and Environmental Law, with Professor Gerald Caden, who's a mentor of mine and is a great faculty member at the GSD. And he points out that lawyers, even though we're very sort of textually oriented, through things like zoning codes, historic preservation ordinances, the National Environmental Policy Act on the infrastructure stuff I'm interested in, all of this stuff has to go through very extensive environmental reviews, which is a legal process, right? So the ability to combine like vision with implementation, that's really why I'm combining urban planning with the law.
So, Michael, what would you tell someone who was considering applying for the Rappaport Fellowship?
I would say there's three things. So the first is just to go for it, right? This was the summer between graduating from my planning program and going to law school. And there was a part of me that wanted to, take a breather, but the opportunity really was sort of too good to pass up. You get to work grounded in a place on a particular policy issue where you are really like moving the ball forward. And that's pretty incredible to be able to have a tangible impact. I know one other Rappaport fellow my year, he was also in Professor Bilmes's class, worked on the proposal to create an infrastructure bank in Massachusetts, and Governor Healy signed the bill into law. Right. So there's this ability to really work on solving a problem where you can see a tangible impact. Even when it's a very long-term thing like my project, you do like feel like you're moving the ball forward, which is great. The second thing would be advice for like when you're in the fellowship. I would just say it's this interesting combination of like both being able to be nimble while also keeping your eyes on the prize. So you will have this sort of goal and aim, but you need to be able to adapt flexibly, particularly working in like I was in, the congressman's office. It's national politics can intervene and that kind of thing. So an ability to sort of work in that kind of fast-paced environment without losing sight of the important thing. And then also just to really value the mentorship opportunities. I'm very happy to have made such amazing connections with my faculty members at Harvard, Professor Bilmes, Professor Ian Martino, Professor Benedictus Kestner, who really did an incredible job in terms of shaping like the academic background that brought me into the Rappaport program. And then obviously mentorship within the context of the summer placement itself, both from the congressman, but then also my supervisor. And it was just really cool to learn from someone who has hands-on experience. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the Rappaport Institute for, honestly, you guys have made like a big investment in me, and I'm very aware of that and hope to live up to it. So just thank you so much.